Okay, so I think we have a few minutes for maybe one or two questions from the audience. So if there are any, Scott?
Thank you, Brenda. And I want to really thank the panel for it was an excellent discussion. So I'm Scott Ratson. I'm head of global corporate affairs at Anheuser-Busch InBev, which includes our sustainability and other efforts. And I wanted to say that I've heard a lot of very interesting pieces, having been at Johnson & Johnson for 11 years and working on the pharma and CD work and consumer side and other pieces. And before that at U.S. government, before that at a not-for-profit. So you get where I might be going with this question. We've set up, and Pepsi's one of our partners on a global road safety partnership called Together for Safer Roads. We have an IOM paper that our Alison Goldberg has written. We have Pepsi, AIG, AT&T, Facebook, and other companies. And we had to organize that as a not-for-profit to get the share of voice. So it's a 501c3 representing the companies, UPS as well, and others who are in the room are part of it. We've had other activities in my prior position that we've, at other places that we've done with UN Foundation. We've had to do with other not-for-profits, academic institutions, NGOs like PSI and so forth. And some of you mentioned today that you still have some foundations in your companies and often operationalize it through there. And earlier we heard the challenge that we have with WHO. When Lilly launched their NCD partnership, I was at that meeting in Geneva, sponsored by The Economist. The head of WHO, or the Assistant Director General, walked out because he didn't want to be there with private sector-led initiative. So I raise what's maybe a fundamental question. How do we get this done with the maximal impact in the organizational structures in the world that we live in? Do we do this with NGOs, with academic institutions, via foundations, create new partnerships where partnerships don't exist? Or do we wait for the institutions, many of us that are represented in this room, I look at Simon and others, the UN institutions, to help us create that sort of partnership and opportunity for framework? So how would you and your organization work with both your foundation or other entities to help make the biggest difference and have the most collective impact? And let me just end by really thanking Dr. Khan for setting the stage for a physician in a company like Pepsi, because I'm a public health physician, and after leaving J&J, I was fortunate to get two public health doctoral level people to work in global corporate affairs at the world's largest brewer. And I couldn't do that at Johnson & Johnson. So it says sometimes you also have to look at unique ways to bring the best people together. So I want to thank you for actually, that was Pepsi's work of bringing good teams of people together.
I'll start. I think it's a great question. And we are very clear that there are some pieces of work we do that will affect our business. Obviously, we want to sell more insulin in the long term. And for those things, we fund them through our business. We're very upfront about it. We're very upfront about what is in it for us, as well as what we believe is in it for society and the communities in which we're working. And then for those things that don't fall into that shared value category, we fund them through our foundation, and we're very explicit there about what we can and cannot do in terms of promoting our business in any way through that work. So we try to make those crystal clear. And of course, then it becomes a little easier to work with organizations like the WHO on the foundation side and on the sort of the pure philanthropy side.
Let me, I think Kate said it very well earlier, and that was, clearly we have to work together, but doing just philanthropy and donating, as you said, are one-off projects. And if I look back a few years ago, as a member of our board, and I remain a member of our board of our foundation, great projects, but how many of them scaled and how many of them then continued? And there's almost always a great project, then there's a finite end, either because people lose interest, people go on, something happens. So I don't have the answer to this, but now I'm reflecting back and I say, how do I triangulate what the foundation's mission is with the business's mission, where we have expertise, knowledge, and resources, and the stakeholders on the ground outside the company? Let me give you an example. 2011, a few years ago, almost 9 years ago, we said we need to enter China with our food business. So 2011, we partnered with the Chinese government, regional, provincial, national, their agricultural department, and said, what if we created the infrastructure to build farms in Mongolia. A highly needed part, very arid, and we created enough farms that today there are 10,000 households operating those farms, where their incomes has more than quadrupled. The output of those farms we buy. We now supply into the cities. It could not have been done without the partnership of the national government, the regional government, us, and NGOs. The interesting thing when I talk about ecosystem, what has happened now is several schools have been built in those villages. I think it's 2 or 3 libraries have been built, and you can start to see what happens. But it required a center of gravity almost. All we could do was bring a piece of the pie. So I agree with you, Scott. There's going to be people, it's tough. But I've found if you have the patience and the persistence, there will be players. We've had wonderful partnerships with the United Nations. We've actually had partnerships and dialogue with WHO. And so despite all of that, getting it on the table, and sometimes you have to go through intermediaries. That's okay. You know, I'm a firm believer, are you interested in the mission or just the recognition? If you're interested in the mission, then if it's the recognition as the primary driver, then it's a different ballgame. Let's figure out what the mission is. If you get it right, I think over time recognition will happen.
Just a quick one on this. Having worked with a lot of foundations and now starting to work more with business units within corporations, if it's a grant or philanthropy, foundation's perfect. And with no disrespect to any foundation leaders sitting next to me, who I'm very appreciative of their support, if it's going to be shared value, if you don't have the business at the table, if they're not leading it, if they're not thinking about it as a business, it just goes to a place that I'll speak in French about. You know, it just doesn't work for anybody. And so having, you know, done a lot of work in Nigeria recently with a very large FMCG company, essentially we had the foundation leading it, and they wanted to create shared value, they wanted to be making money, and the foundation did not have the right business connections to be able to do it.
Yeah, I guess the only other point that I would add is we've had a Matt Gates Fund US and Canada and UK for some time. I'm in the midst of forming an Estee Lauder Corporation Foundation, and I think, you know, the other thing is to take a look at what your foundation configuration is. So we have really key business people on the foundation board, but it also gives you an opportunity to bring in some very heavy-hitting external players. So I think that's a way to add some different voices to the table. And the other thing I just want to say is that, you know, I think, you know, as in every sort of situation, there's offense and there's defense, right? And I think one of the things that I've noticed is in the companies where there's a big defense, where there's a big concern, reputational concern of, you know, PETA, or there's a sort of corporation does no good, the defense often kills any like nascent offensive ideas. And so one of the ways I think to move forward in companies like that is to not go for like a big reveal, like a big program launch, but to incrementally build your offense. And if you're going to do that, in particular to go back to some of the comments of Dr. Khan, you got to start with your employees. If you look at the latest Committee to Encourage Corporate Philanthropy, the vast majority of CEOs see employees and employee engagement as the main reason to do good works in the companies. And so basically, if you engage your employees, and if the employees think it's real and it's true, I think you can then build out your offense. Because at least I've found that you're better off not betting on one big iconic partnership, that you're better off with pieces, incremental, you know, the short pass, if you will, not the Hail Mary pass. I think that you're going to build a stronger program that will be more sustainable. And that also, you know, in all of our companies, people's personnel changes, right? And it may be the head of R&D changes or the head of communications changes. And you don't want the one big piece of offense to be completely dependent upon one key personnel.
That's a great point. So we need to move into our next session, so please join me in thanking our panel. Thank you so much. Great.